Hello and welcome to this presentation on preparing for the time when we cannot buy or sell. There is a passage in the scripture that says we're going to have a time like that, and I believe that you can see that in this next slide. I have that actual passage that this is talking about the beast. He will cause all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. That's Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 and 17. And this is a very stressful time that we face. And I believe that we are right on the verge of this time. And as we face this time, as we can see in this statement here from the book Last Day Events, page 151, it says the only way in which men will be able to stand firm in the conflict is to be rooted and grounded in Christ. They must receive the truth as it is in Jesus. That's Last Day Events, page 151. And so as we look forward to this time, I believe that many of us are kind of thinking wrong. We have what Dr. Neil Nedley, I heard him call it stinking thinking one time. And so we need to really be very purposeful in the way that we think and process the information that's coming to us from the news sources, from what we actually see in day to day and what we see in the Word of God. And so I believe, as we can see in this slide, we need a mindset shift. It's time for us to sober up because we need to realize that the world is not the same as it used to be. So what are these mindset shifts? I have 7 points that I want to cover. Now, I don't in any way think that these are necessarily comprehensive, but they're just some points that I want us to really consider today because these are ones that really stand out to me as things that maybe people aren't necessarily thinking about. So here's the first point. We need to accept that things are just going to be harder and that the world as we know it, when I say that, I mean the grocery store down the road, the Walmart corner market, the Amazon online. These things are not going to be available to us anymore. So think about how you would do your shopping. How would you buy the things that you need? These are things that we really need to start thinking about. And there's some critical things that, and we'll cover as we get further on into our presentation, there's some really critical, important things that I think that we need to purchase in advance. And not just things that we need to purchase, but skills that we need to gain. So in our next point, we look at what we need to do is to learn to simplify. You know, we really don't need a lot of stuff. I married my husband almost 11 years ago, and since we married, we have moved, I think, 14 times. That's a lot of times to move. And you know, you get tired of dragging a lot of stuff around. So we get rid of stuff. Every time we move, we get rid of more stuff. And we're about to move again from my mother's place in Alabama up to my husband's mother's place in North Dakota for the summer. And we are going to go through our things and get rid of more stuff. And that makes me think of this picture here that I remember reading about this, and I believe it's in early writings. This is a vision that Sister White had where the people of God, as they went through time, they started out with their wagons loaded down with their earthly possessions. And as they went along, the path got more and more narrow, so that eventually they even had to take their socks off and squeeze close to the wall, until finally at the end there was nothing but this green cord of faith and that they had to cling to with all their might. And so I believe that God is trying to help loosen our grip from these possessions that we hold so dear. And so whatever he brings into your life that kind of causes you to lose some of those things, I believe we need to learn to embrace that as a blessing from Him. So in our next bullet point, we see that we need to accept that we will not have any rights. Things just won't be fair. We need to think about Daniel, Joseph, think about Jesus and their lives on this earth. Things were not necessarily fair for them. And I don't know about you, but I have a really keen sense of justice. And if I could say it in Alabama words, if something ain't right, I'm going to fix it, And that mindset springs from self. And we really need to allow the Lord to cleanse us of self and of those things that would cause us to lash out against injustice and things that are just not fair. We need to learn to accept that's just the way it's going to be. Think about Christ as he was nailed to the cross. It wasn't fair, but he submitted. And so God help us to have that kind of beautiful spirit. Here is a passage from the book Last Day Events, page 145. Those who live during the last days of this earth's history will know what it means to be persecuted for the truth's sake. In the courts, and justice will prevail. And so we needn't think that we're going to run to the judge and get things straightened out. And reading on in the same book, page 146, in the Last Day Events, it says, in cases where we are brought before the courts, we are to give up our rights unless it brings us in collision with God. It's not our rights that we're pleading for, but God's right to our service. And God has given us a work for this time. God has given us instruction of how to live in this time. And if man seeks to interfere with that, if man seeks to squelch our giving the message that God has told, then we need to move forward for God's rights to our service. And again, things are not going to be fair. We're going to suffer when we seek to do the work that God has given us. In our next point, we need to begin to think of ways that we can be independent of the power grid. Think about everything that you've done today. Even right now, watching the computer screen or the TV screen or what have you, whatever device you're using to view this, think about when we don't have these devices. We're not always going to have them. We're not always going to have the power to blow dry our hair or cook our food or what have you. So where did your water come from? Where did your lights come from this morning? Where did your heat come from? Where does your food come from? We need to learn to start thinking about these things. How can I do these things without electricity, without the power grid? We need to begin to learn how to become independent. Next point, we need to be willing to sweat, to work, to get dirty, and to gather tools that we can use in working. You'd be surprised. When my husband and I had our property in Kentucky, we had a farm and we had camp meetings and things, and we would have people come and we would teach them how to dig up potatoes from the garden and plant seeds and do different things. And it was always entertaining to me to see not just ladies, but there were even men who really didn't want to get their fingernails dirty. And so we need to set that aside. We need to realize I may not always smell good. I may not always look just so. I need to accept that when I work, I'm going to get dirty, okay? And I need to be willing to do that. Next point, we need to accept that we are going to be considered the offscouring of the earth. I think we all like to be liked. We all like to be respected. And if maybe men are more, high on the respect part and ladies more on the like part or love part. But nonetheless, I think that we need to just realize it's coming. We are going to be hated. We are going to not be accepted. Okay? We need to remember that Peter, in John chapter 18, we're told the story of how when Peter denied Christ, he resisted his own cross. He had given up everything to follow Christ except self. This point of self is something that I'm really pondering a lot right now. Selfishness manifests itself in ways that we don't even think about, and I'm hoping to do a video on that topic pretty soon. But contempt and scorn were the undoing of Peter. Being accused of being associated with Christ at the finger of a woman caused this strong man to fail. And had he accepted the warning of Christ earlier when he sank, when the Lord called him out of the boat to walk on water, when he cried, Lord, save me, if he had continued to cry that, I believe that Jesus could have kept him from his failure. Last day events, we'll go back to that. The same page, 146. It says, wealth, genius, and education will combine to cover us with contempt. Persecuting rulers, ministers, church members will conspire against them with voice and pen, by boasts, threats, and ridicule. They will seek to overthrow their faith. And so we need to plead with God to help us that we would be hardened against contempt and ridicule, that we would understand our faith, that we would have the abiding presence of Christ in our souls to be kept, because that's the only way any of us are going to be kept through this storm. So the final point on this is that we need to realize that we are going to be in an austere or extremely severely difficult situation. And the level of preparation that we make now is all the preparation we're going to have, because we won't be able to buy or sell. And so I like this picture here in the Proverbs chapter 22, verse 3. It says, a prudent man foreseeth evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. If you look at that picture there, that's a terrible storm bearing down on that farm. Now, just suppose there's a tornado in that storm, and the person in that house is deciding at that moment, I think I need to take a bath. Well, there's a time for everything, and it's not time right now to just relax and enjoy all the goodies of this world. There's a storm bearing down upon us, and we need to sober up. We need to be the prudent people that foresee that evil and hide ourselves. We hide ourselves in Christ. Okay, in Prophets and Kings, page 184, these are the words of Satan. And I always like to have a peep into the mind of Satan, to know what he's thinking, because he's our enemy. And if you know what your enemy is thinking, you are money ahead. These are words of Satan. For fear of wanting or lacking food and clothing, they will join with the world in transgressing God's law. The earth will be wholly under my dominion. It doesn't actually say here that it is the lack of food and clothing. It says it's the fear of lacking food and clothing. So we need to really rivet ourselves to Christ, believing that he will provide for us. And he went through these experiences. If you look at his experience in the wilderness, I think we'll talk about that more in just a little bit. And actually, we've already touched on it a little bit. Counsels on Health, page 495. This is a very important passage. Under God's direction, food will go a long way. When we place ourselves in right relation to him, he will help us. And the food that we eat in obedience to him will sustain us. It will satisfy us. We can subsist on very much less than we think that we can. If God's blessing is on the food and it is for his glory, he can multiply it. And I want to just continue straight into this next passage on counsels on diet and foods, page 202. The time of trouble is just before us, and then stern necessity will require the people of God to deny self and to eat, look at this, merely enough to sustain life. That's not a lot of food. But God will prepare us for that time. In that fearful hour, our necessity will be God's opportunity to impart his strengthening power and to sustain his people. I'm going to share some of my personal health journey as we go on into this presentation. But let me just pause right here and tell you, I have had a lot of things health-wise that I've had to deal with. And one of the things that has happened to me is I've developed autoimmune disease as a result of some health conditions that I'll talk about again in just a minute. But I've had to change my diet quite a bit. I have had to leave off this thing, gluten-free and no almonds and no coconut and no this and no that, and you get to the point where what can I eat? But I have learned to embrace this as a gift from God to prepare me for this time that we just read about, when we will have to eat merely enough to sustain life. I have come to the point where I eat just to live. I don't live to eat. And I praise God for that experience. So if you find yourself struggling with some kind of health restrictions and dietary restrictions, embrace that as a gift from God, and He's preparing you for this time that's ahead of us. A couple more things here. Counsels on Health, page 574. It says that as our first parents lost Eden through the indulgence of appetite, our only hope of regaining Eden is through a firm denial of appetite and passion. And that was the experience of Christ. As we look at the next slide, we can see that victory over appetite is imperative. Think about the children of Israel when God brought them out of Egypt. First thing He did was change their diet. I mean, we're not down to just manna yet, but they were. God severely restricted their diet. Are we ready for that kind of restriction on our appetites? God help us. We need a mindset shift. I think I need to add that to that bullet point on our appetite. Okay, think about Daniel. Daniel had to face this thing with diet right there in Daniel chapter 1. That was the first test of Jesus when He was, out in the wilderness. So we need to embrace these things. Also, I believe that the difficulty with buying and selling has already begun. If you go to grocery stores today, I don't know about in your country, but here in America, there's GMO this and GMO that and sprayed this and sprayed that, and it's like running the gauntlet when you go to the grocery store because it's very difficult to find things that are healthful. So I believe it behooves us to learn to grow our own foods. God is seeking to prepare us for the time ahead of us. So once again, we can look at the bullet points, and I just added one about we need to allow the Lord to begin to prepare our appetites. So you can look this over and see, again, this is not a comprehensive list, but it is, there are some things here that I think that we need to think about. So let's shift now into some more practical things of actual things that I believe we need to address before we go into this time. We need to address urgent healthcare needs. So I wear glasses for reading, and thankfully this screen is far enough from me that I can read without my glasses, but if it were any closer, I would have to put my glasses on to be able to read that. And so if you have problems with your eyes, if you have a cataract maybe that needs to be addressed or what have you, address it, whether you choose to do that surgically or naturally or what have you. Address your eyes are so important. We all know that. I think I have 3 pairs of glasses. So I believe we all need to have extras of these so that we can see and continue to read and read God's Word. Okay, we need to address our teeth issues in the next bullet point. Just think about if you go into the time when you can't go to the dentist and you have an abscess that you've been putting off dealing with, what happens if that thing really gets bad? Think about these things. Do you have any kind of dental issue that's going on now that you could take care of? And my husband and I have literally put our money where our mouth is on this. We have gone to a biological dentist and had some things that we needed to have taken care of. It was expensive, but we view it as well worth it. Okay, next, if you need any surgical repair, let's say you're a man or a lady and you have a hernia, whether it's an inguinal hernia, umbilical hernia, or what have you. If you have anything like that needs surgical repair and you can get it done now, get it done. Don't wait. Don't delay. Okay, next, and this is a big one for me. This is kind of a hobby horse. This is a soapbox that I preach from every day. We need to go into this time in as good of health as we possibly can. We live in a world that is very toxic today, so I believe that all of us need to live a lifestyle of detoxification. And if you have never done a parasite detox, I believe that needs to be addressed. And here is what we actually do for parasite detox. In this next slide, we have these items on our web store. Mimosa pudica seed, which kills the adult parasites, and then we have a blend that contains these herbs that you can see: wormwood, black walnut hull, clove, and a few other herbs, and that kills the eggs. The mimosa pudica is extremely powerful to kill adult parasites, but it does not kill the eggs that they pass as they're dying. They want to live, so they pass a whole bunch of eggs. And if you don't take this other blend in order to deal with the eggs, you could reinfest yourself. Personally, I believe that everyone should do a quarterly parasite detox. We have some information about this on our webpage at closureforjesus.com under the blog tab if you're interested in learning more about how to do the parasite detox. Okay, let's look at some practical healthcare preparation. I believe that we need to obtain books because we're not going to have these computers. The internet is eventually going to go bye-bye. Okay, we're not going to have access to those things. So I believe that we need to buy some health books, such as hydrotherapy books, natural remedy books, books on how to identify wild edibles and medicinals, books on how to grow your own food, skill books like how to build simple things, carpentry books, building, pruning, food storage, things like that. So those are things that we want to obtain. Also, as we can see in this next slide, we need to obtain some skills. And one of the main skills that I believe everyone should obtain is basic first aid. Take a basic first aid course. And there is a very good wilderness first aid course that's available online if you go to the herbalmedic.com, I think. It's Herbal Medics Academy. Sam Kaufman is the teacher, and he offers a fantastic wilderness first aid course that is, I took it, and it was I learned, I'm trained as a registered nurse, and I learned a lot in that class. It was very helpful for me. Okay, next, in the next bullet, we need to obtain materials. There's going to be some tools that we need to grow when we can't buy and sell. One of the things that I brought with me here to show you is, how are you going to start your fire when the matches run out or the lighter runs out? I have this device here, and it may actually be made in Denmark or Sweden or somewhere in your neck of the woods, but this is a fire steel, and I won't strike it because I don't want to burn up my computer. But if you strike this, it gives a big shower of sparks that you can start a fire with, and this thing will last a long time. I mean, you can probably start thousands of fires with this. So you need to think, do I have some kind of way to start fires? To purify water. Water purification is a huge, huge thing. We need to be able to have pure water. So we need to start thinking about the kind of tools that we would need to have for that time. And finally, I believe that we need to consider having extra for our neighbor that may not have known they needed to prepare or may not have been able to for some reason. And so bartering is going to be a very real thing. And I mean, it even is now, but in the future, it's going to be very real. And this concept of bartering and having extra, I was talking to a friend of mine one time, and she asked me, she said, Danna, how do you know when you've gone from preparation to hoarding? And I said, that's a really good question. So I looked it up. And here's the definitions that I found online of the difference between hoarding and preparation. You can see that their hoarding occurs when someone struggles to discard items and collects unnecessary objects. Over time, the inability to throw things away can overrun the pace of collecting. Preparation, on the other hand, is the action or process of making something ready for use or service, or of getting ready for some occasion, test, or duty. This includes preparing for those who weren't able to prepare, so extra is necessary. Now I'm going to show you some pictures over the next few slides, and I want you to look at these pictures just for a second and just answer to yourself, is this hoarding or is this preparation? I think everybody can see that one. And in this next one, what do you think? What's the next one? Yeah, that has a lot to do with your mindset. I think that person needs a mindset shift so that their stuff can look like this next slide. That is very organized. You see the nice seed packets. You see the wood that is so neatly stacked. I love to stack firewood. I would rather stack firewood than can or garden or just about anything else. I love stacking firewood. To me, it's like playing with, we had this toy called Lincoln Logs when I was a kid. And this is my grown-up Lincoln Logs. But preparedness is a very orderly thing, a very purposeful thing. And here's our final pitch. I'm not at all suggesting that you need this many herbs, but you do need some herbs. You do need to learn some natural remedies. And so think about the things that you have on hand right now. Could you deal with healthcare situations? We're going to talk about some healthcare situations that you might not have thought about dealing with when you can't run to the doctor or the supermarket or whatever and get supplies for that. Councils on Health, page 533, says that soon, I wish to tell you that soon there will be no work done in ministerial lines but medical missionary work. And so we need to learn the simple natural treatments. Here's a very important passage from Councils on Health, page 506. As religious aggression subverts the liberties of our nation, and that is happening right now. Okay, this is happening. Those who would stand for freedom of conscience will be placed in unfavorable positions. We are seeing this. For their own sake, they should, while they have opportunity, and we have a little window right now, learn natural remedies. We should become intelligent in regard to disease, its causes, prevention, and cure. And those who do this will find a field of labor anywhere. There will be suffering ones, plenty of them, who will need help, not only among those of our own faith, but largely among those who know not the truth. We're told that the health message is the right arm of the gospel, so we need to learn these things. I believe that we need to learn basic vital health care skills, and here's a few that I've listed. If you can learn these simple treatments, these 5 hydrotherapy treatments would be so helpful if you could learn these things. Basic hydrotherapy and how to work with fever and temperature. There's these few hydrotherapy treatments that I think we need to learn: contrast baths, hot foot baths, sitz baths, the Russian steam bath, and fomentations. And right now you can find videos on how to do all of these on YouTube. And we have some of these on our YouTube channel. We also need to learn how to do basic wound care. You know, wounds are not something that a lot of people really like to deal with. To me, I really enjoyed it, especially when I was in nursing. I enjoyed doing wound care, but we need to learn how to recognize infection and how to treat it and how to deal with basic wounds and how to care for them. We need to learn basic herbs, and we need to learn how to go out in nature and identify them, because soon we're not going to be able to get online and place an order and have herbs brought to my door. We're not going to be able to go down to the corner market and buy them. So we need to learn what is available in our environment. It's been a blessing in many ways to me that my husband and I have moved so much since we got married, because I have learned from different regions different medicinal herbs, and it has really expanded my knowledge of medicinal edible herbs. I believe that we need to learn to make our own charcoal, learn how to make charcoal poultices. I do have videos on our channel how to do charcoal poultices. And I think I mentioned already, take a first aid course. So please take a first aid course. Go somewhere and learn basic first aid and make a first aid kit. That's on the next bullet. Make a first aid kit and practice. Find somebody that has the same interest and practice on each other. It's really important that you practice these things. Now, I wanted to list a few issues that you can expect to deal with during this time. Now, I can't go into a lot of detail on these. This is just to kind of get the gears turning and help you to think. So here's some things you might have to deal with. I am going to go into more detail on animal bites because of my personal experience. Burns, clean and dirty cuts. Some cuts are dirty, some cuts are clean. If I'm in the kitchen cooking and I cut myself with a kitchen knife, that's a clean cut. But if I'm out on the farm working and I cut myself with a chainsaw, That's not a clean cut. That's a dirty cut. You have to treat those differently. Do you know how? What's the difference between how you treat those two? So if we can look again at the bullet points here, we need to learn how to deal with eye injuries, fractures. Do you know how to splint a fracture? Do you know how to deal with an abscess? Do you know how to deal with muscle injuries? And I've listed a few remedies in these slides. But now let me share a little bit of personal experience with you. Um, Shortly after I married my husband, were living in North Dakota, and I had flown down to Alabama to visit my family, and I went to visit a friend of mine, and I did not know that she had gotten a new dog. And we were the kind of friends where, you just tap on the door and walk in, you know each other so well. Well, when I tapped on the door and opened in, I was met with a creature that looked like this guy in this next slide. It was a black-mouthed cur. And the bite force of this dog was around 180 to 200 pounds, and it was a large male, so I'm sure that his bite force was on the high end. She had her new grandbaby in the house, and that dog did not know me. When I walked in, he met me at the door, and he delivered this to my forearm, and I had a matching one on the other side. If you can see the puncture wound there, that went all the way to the bone. And that is very dangerous. Animal bites are very dangerous. The only thing I remember is just feeling this crushing weight on my forearm. I didn't even realize that his teeth had penetrated the skin until I looked down and saw the blood. So you can see in the next slide the matching one on the other side there. But it was almost time for me to fly back to North Dakota, and my mother had a little bit of charcoal powder, and so I made several charcoal poultices, and I had a long layover. It was about an 8 or 9 hour journey back up to North Dakota from Alabama, and by the time I got to North Dakota, I had red streaks going up my arm from that puncture wound there, and I knew I was in trouble. If you know anything about wounds, that meant that my wound was infected. It had gone into my blood, into my lymphatics, and I knew that if I went to the emergency room, I knew I would get antibiotics, which I didn't want to do. B, they might admit me for IV antibiotics, which I definitely didn't want to do. So I said a prayer and I asked the Lord to show me what to do. I had never done this treatment before on myself or anyone else, but I got my big bread bowl, as you can see in this picture. This is an actual picture of myself doing that treatment. This was actually probably 2 days after I started doing the treatments. Initially, I wasn't interested in taking pictures because I was in emergency mode. I knew I was in trouble. So I put my whole forearm, everything I could fit, in this big bowl of charcoal water, and that was very hot. It was barely hot. I could barely keep my arm in that. It was just that hot. And then the next thing I did was I would run it under the cold, as you can see in the next slide. So I would go from the hot to the cold, from the hot with the charcoal over to the cold, and that is cold well water in North Dakota, so that water is very cold. And so that contrast was really broad. And in 24 hours, all of the red streak was gone. It was completely gone. The pain had greatly subsided. The swelling had gone down. You can see, if we can show the slide under the running water, there was still quite a bit of swelling there, but it was much less than it had been the couple of days before that. So we need to learn how to do these things. And then 2 weeks later, I got bitten on the back of my leg by a cat. That's not my actual bite. It was very difficult to take a picture of it because it's on the back of my leg. But mine looked very much like that. I called my friend, Dr. Marianne McNeilis, who used to work at the Mayo Clinic in infectious diseases. And she said, Danna, I'm very worried that you're going to get tetanus. I think you need to have the tetanus booster. And I said, Dr. Marianne, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the dog bite. So I got a 5-gallon bucket and put very hot water and charcoal, and I did the same thing back and forth. And I recovered without incident. I was fine. Okay. And then August of 2018, I veered away from my natural remedies. I had a cat and we lived on a farm. If you don't know that, Clostridium tetani, which is the bacteria that causes tetanus, lives in the gut of cattle. Now, we bought what had been a cattle farm, and my cat would go out into the old cattle barn and use the facilities there. And so she had that Clostridium tetani on her claws. And one day I picked her up and petted her, and something scared her, and she left me with a deep scratch in my hand right here. Well, I was experimenting with pine sap salve at the time, so I went in the house, washed it thoroughly, and I sealed it up with pine sap salve, which, if you don't know, Clostridium tetani is an anaerobic bacteria. It grows in the absence of oxygen, and that pine sap salve completely sealed off the oxygen, and I ended up with tetanus. And I was on oxygen for 2 months because the Clostridium tetani damaged the intercostal muscles. And that was quite an experience. I ended up having the human immunoglobulin, and I had 13 injections total, and every one of them had mercury in them. So then I had to deal with mercury toxicity. So I veered away and I paid the cost. I also learned later, my husband and I had been on a heavy metal detox using high dose vitamin C. And it was after we titrated our vitamin C levels down that I became symptomatic of the tetanus with my jaw. I couldn't even open my mouth. It was just, oh, I could barely get a spoon in enough to eat. My neck was tight and hurt. And so that started happening when I titrated down my vitamin C levels. And I learned later that vitamin C can prevent tetanus from running its full course. So I wish I had stuck with my natural remedies, but I didn't. Then in January of 2019, I got bitten by a tick that was infected with Rocky Mountain spotted fever, rickettsial bacteria. As you can see in this next slide, I was sick with flu-like symptoms for a week. I found a tick on the inside of my iliac crest. I took doxycycline for a week, and the Rocky Mountain spotted fever got a strong hold on my system. And I just recently was able to finally eradicate it. And I ended up having to go to a naturopathic doctor in Mesa, Arizona to get ozone and ultraviolet light therapy to kill that Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So it's very important to hit these things early and to hit them hard with these natural remedies, because as we see from my previous experience, the natural remedies do work. And I am going to claim this promise in Ezekiel 34:25, in the time that we have to flee to the wilderness, that God says, I will make with them a covenant of peace, and they will cause the evil beast to cease out of the land, and they shall dwell safely in the wilderness and sleep in the woods. So I am asking the Lord to please keep the ticks off of me when we have to flee to the wilderness. Okay, so here's some more. Here's the list again of issues that we can expect to deal with. Just to glance at that just a minute. Move into the next slide. We can see a lot more issues that you may want to think about having to deal with. Maybe you want to take a screenshot of this. Tendon and ligament injuries, blisters, gut issues, GI issues, skin irritations. I think we need to advance the slide. Pressure sores, hypothermia. Do you know how to deal with hypothermia? Do you know how to deal with dehydration? Do you know how to deal with nosebleed? There's an herb called yarrow. You can take a leaf of yarrow and roll it up and stick it up your nose, and it will stop bleeding. I mean, if it's within reason, you can definitely use that. Here's in the next slide some more things. Just think about, how would you deal with fungal infections, with sore throat, with a sty on the eye, with penetrating wounds such as nails. Let me just mention something on the puncture wounds with animal bites. I do not ever, even though pine sap is a very good remedy for cuts, I don't recommend it for puncture wounds now after my own experience with that, because you can seal up bacteria in there and get into trouble. Okay, there's some vital first aid components that I would like to just quickly go through with you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but vital first aid kit components: a tourniquet, pressure bandages, cravats, and safety pins, and the knowledge of how to use those things. There's a lot that you can do with a simple cravat, which is just a square piece of cloth. You can fold it all kind of ways and do all kinds of things with it. Cayenne, twice In the last 2 years, by God's grace, I have been able to stop a stroke in my own mother using cayenne tincture. I praise God for cayenne. You need to have some on your person at all times. Occlusive dressings, gloves, gauze, and bandages, band-aids, tape. I'm not going to just take a lot of time. If we can go through the next slides and just look at these quickly to see some things that you could put into your first aid kit, just to give you an idea. As we can go just to the next slide, just quickly to run through, because I believe everyone needs to just take a first aid kit and build a first aid kit, take a first aid class. Okay, I want to show you this slide about herbs that I think that everyone should know about. And I have had very good experience using these herbs. On the next slide, if we can think about, I think that these are herbs that will grow just about anywhere. Comfrey is a powerful wound healing herb. It's a cell growth proliferator. And I actually had a friend who cut off two of his fingers right down to the bone, the fingertips. And using comfrey, he regrew his fingertips, fingernail and all, in 3 weeks, and he was playing guitar again. If I had not seen that, I don't know that I would have believed it, but it happened. Okay, usnea is another one. I believe that usnea grows everywhere. Plantain is a powerful healing herb. Cayenne, I've already shared some information about that. Cleavers for lymph flow, turmeric. Actually, I have a presentation on how to treat venomous bites and stings using herbs, and I talk about turmeric. And their stinging nettles is anti-inflammatory and a very powerful herb. And then there's thyme and oregano, Oregon grape and marshmallow, wild lettuce and jewelweed and mullein. All of these things, many of them we can just find right outside of our own door. And so we need to learn how to find these, how to identify them, and how to use them. I hope that this talk has encouraged you to begin to think differently. I hope that you will experience a mindset shift as we look forward to the time when we cannot buy or sell. May God help us to be ready.